This week on Financial Choices Matter, who really pays taxes? We're going to talk about that, and before the IRS looks at me, I pay mine.
Me too.
But we're going to talk about
every quarter.
Charles pays his, right?
Every quarter I send my forms in.
Yep. Exactly. We're going to talk about like the breakdown a little bit on tax breakdown on how everything kind of lays out. We got a little graph we'll show you guys. So kind of just, I guess, the range, Charles, and looking at how things happen when it comes to paying the federal taxes, because the government doesn't have a product to sell in order to pay for all the things that we need. So
no one would buy it if they had one.
Right. We're the product, right? So we're the ones paying in to get the stuff done. So isn't there an old marketing sales technique that says if you're involved with something and there's no product being sold, it's because you're the product? Right. They're trying to sell you. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah.
So it's interesting stuff. How you doing this week anyway, my friend?
I am well.
Yeah.
I'm excited. What we're talking about now is taxes, and you're going to probably be seeing this when the election's over with. So it's going to be a whole new world. And
right. Well, we're taping this one a week before. So we'll.
We don't know, and trust me, I ain't talking politics with anybody, so it doesn't really. Matter.
So we're taping this before the election happens, but we're actually probably dropping it 2 days after the election. So, which works out fine anyway, because we don't know the answers right now, and we don't really want to talk about it 2 days later because we're all just kind of tired of it. But let's talk about taxes, because unfortunately, death and taxes, right? Age-old conversation piece. So let's talk a little bit about taxes. You got this little interesting chart. We're going to break down how people pay stuff. So hit me with it.
Okay, I think it's interesting that this chart came from First Trust. I like those guys as economists.
Okay.
And it's just who's really paying. They've broken it down into the bottom 50% of all taxpayers, and then incrementally ratcheted up to the top 1% of all taxpayers. Okay. So that makes sense. So let's start at the top. The top 1% of all taxpayers.
Now, this is not the top 1% of money makers. This is top 1% of taxpayers.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Top 1% of taxpayers actually make 26% of all of the money.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting.
But they pay 46% of all the taxes. They pay almost half of all the federal taxes paid. The top 1%.
So the big dogs do pay their fair share.
The big dogs do pay their fair share. Yes.
Okay.
Do they pay it as smartly as possible? Yeah.
Well, they have the resources for that.
That's right. They hire the best accountants, and they have the best lobbyists, and they change the rules as much as they possibly can, but they still pay a gob of tax. So the top half of all income earners, pay 76% of the taxes. So the bottom half of all people only pay 25% of all the income tax that gets paid. So it's actually a relatively fair distribution of who pays what. And most people would never believe that. The bottom,
because it feels different than that, but it's an interesting breakdown, right?
Yeah. I mean, it really is. If you look at the numbers are just numbers, and it's how you interpret them. I mean, it's all the conversation that goes into what the numbers. People think the numbers should be and really are, but if you look about what actually happens, it's not that way. So this is just a fairly simple explanation of gross federal income and gross taxes paid, federal income tax paid. The state stuff is a whole different animal, and that's
we're just talking Fed right here.
We're just talking to federal because that's the only one that's consistent across all 50 states.
Yeah. So if you're looking on the chart we have on the screen, folks, so you can see the orange, right? So that is share of total federal income taxes paid.
Yep.
Right. So that's how much their share they're paying in. And of course, the blue is share of total adjusted gross federal income. So again, that's the wages, right?
Yeah.
So to Charles's point, that top 1% makes 26% of the majority of the income.
Correct.
And they pay almost 46%
of tax
of their income in taxes. Okay.
No, not of their income, of total taxes paid.
Of total taxes. Okay. Thank you.
Total taxes paid.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're not paying 45% of their income, but they make so much that the cumulative total of all of that ends up being 46% of all the taxes that do get paid.
Interesting. The 10 to 5% one there, almost pretty flat. 10.6% of the income, and then paying 10.2% of the taxes. Yeah, that one's interesting. That one's pretty flat. So, Yeah, I would say, what is that? So basically, we're saying what, middle class and up, if you want to use that kind of terminology.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I think that's the middle class has got these edges.
It's so wide.
It's so wide. There's so many people that fall into that. So I mean, but I just think it's interesting that it's the great misunderstanding of who actually pays the taxes, and the people that are making a lot of money are trying to, they're hiring the people that are helping them pay the least amount of taxes possible, but they still pay a bunch of it.
Yeah.
So I don't think we want to shame the high earners because they don't pay their fair share. They do pay their fair share.
Yeah, I mean, if you Google it, like while we're sitting here talking it, who pays the most taxes in the U.S., from the Tax Foundation, first thing that pops up, and it says high-income taxpayers paid the majority of federal income taxes in 2021. The bottom half of taxpayers earned about 10% of the total adjusted gross income and paid about 2%.
Those stats right there are the numbers that are on the far left-hand side of the graph, the chart you should be looking at.
Yeah. Pretty interesting. I think it's interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, it is a very divisive topic amongst people sometimes. If you're out there working hard and you feel like, man, I'm barely getting by between the taxes I'm paying and inflation, which we're getting ready to drop another episode here in about a week or so on inflation. So check that one out.
Right.
And kind of the simplified conversation around inflation. It feels, Charles, like, how do I ever get ahead? And I get that's where so much of the frustration right now is out there.
Well, yeah. But I'm paying all these taxes. Well, yeah, you're paying proportionate to what you're making. So the trick is just make more. That's a gigantic oversimplification, but or be really clever with what you do pay in tax. Know why you're paying the tax you're paying. Don't just have it happen. Control it as much as possible.
Well, so we talked about the big dogs. They have the resources to play the game the best, but more and more people do have access to that through proper planning, through working with the right CPA, working with financial advisors, whatever. You can use the same code. I mean, it's the same. People always talk about loopholes. There really isn't a loophole. It's the code is the code is the code. It's just how you're getting. Do you have the resources to manipulate and fall within the categories that you need to fall within to, right?
Or if I have a choice of doing it this way and paying more tax or that way and paying less tax, I'd like to go that way and pay less tax.
But many people go with the simplest choice, and that sometimes could be more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's not necessarily the best choice. So you've just got to know where your money's coming from. You got to know, how much can I actually save by doing all of these weird things, perhaps to try to save tax? Is it really going to make that much of a difference? If it is, then you might want to do it. But if it's not, don't worry about it and just focus on just making more, but understanding you're still not paying that much in tax. Your state and local taxes could be a whole different animal.
Yeah, the salt taxes is another animal for sure.
So, I mean, but from a federal income tax point of view, it's really pretty straightforward. The tax tail shouldn't wag the dog ever.
Right. But it usually does for many people because they don't want to deal with it. So they go with the simplest option. Yeah. They'll do TurboTax or something like that. And they plug in the little basic numbers and it's going to kick you out this, formulaic kind of thing. But if you're working with somebody who really kind of understands this stuff more, they're going to and should be able to find ways for you to be more efficient. I mean, look at something as simple, Charles, as it's simple and complicated as the IRMA tax on Social Security. How you pull your money, how you're taking and structuring your income when you get to retirement can kick in this whole other tax you didn't even probably realize was there called the IRMA tax.
That's right. Yeah. And so you've got to coordinate with the tax person to give you the things that make sense to you. Then you've got to understand if I do this, if I'm doing this, am I undoing something else? And just blend it all together and make the choices that make the most sense for you given your circumstances. And everybody's different. Yeah. So what worked for the next door neighbor is not what's going to work for me because they're not in the same business I'm in, or they're not, it's all, everybody's is different.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
You need to know enough to know this is, I can't rail against the fact that I'm paying all these taxes. Well, no, the really wealthy, the high wage earners are really paying all those taxes. They're doing way than their fair share. So, but be smart, be tax smart.
Yeah.
I think that's the ultimate thing. Just be tax smart and do the best that you can given the circumstances that apply to you specifically. Understand why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just run.
Well, and many of us don't. And I think that's the disconnect between working, building your nest egg, which is a little easier. Okay, it's a little easier to grow the money, build the money, than it is to figure out how to handle it on the back end, especially when you get to the retirement stage. Because you just said something, when you pull one lever, and we've talked about this about 1,000,000 times, but it's so true. When you pull one lever in retirement or nearing retirement, it affects about 9. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine where, one thing happens and it triggers a bunch of other things that happen
and all this
after
other
that.
Stuff. Yeah, and then the egg falls off the spoon. And,
totally. Yeah. It's totally the case in retirement. It's not that complicated to truly go to work. Let's super simplify, right? So it seems like November. I know what you're going to say. Yeah, November is our simplification month, if you will. So with our podcast, so you go to work, you put money in your 401k, you build a nest egg. That's the easy part. I mean, it's easier to actually do that from a complicated standpoint than it is to go, well, now how the hell do I turn it into income? And then what does it do to my taxation? How does that affect my Social Security draw, blah, 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 right? Yeah, that's when it gets all kind of kooky,
Yeah.
And that's why you need someone who does this every day.
Well, yeah. So I know a guy. That's why our kids have Roth 401ks.
Yeah.
They're going to eat the tax issue now, and they're going to know, unless the rules change in the future. God knows. Could. Oh, Lord, yes. But in the meantime, I said, we just set them up and said, just do this and don't worry about it.
It's their chessboard, and they get to make the rules, and then we'll have to play the game in the rules of it. So, right. Okay, so at the end of the day, if you're worried about being tax efficient, talk with a financial professional, talk with a CPA, especially if you're getting, 5-10 years outside of retirement or whatever. Even if you're younger and you want to start being more tax efficient.
Yeah,
why not?
Just have an idea. This is the rule. These are the rules right now. We know they're fluid. But these are the rules right now. And if you do, you don't, it's not like you got to go all one way or all the other way.
Right.
Do some of each and spread it out and diversify your tax liability.
Yeah. Well, in a time period when fluidity seems to be all the rage buzzword about things we won't necessarily get into, being fluid with your tax situation is also important, right? So have a conversation, no matter what your age bracket is. It's worthwhile to try to be as tax efficient as possible, and realize that they are, everybody kind of, it is fairly fair. They are kind of paying their fair share to that breakdown.
If that's makes you unhappy, it's still the reality. So
well, think about the flat tax conversation. We'll end with that, because people say, hey, if we went to a flat tax, it would be completely fair across the board. The more you make, the higher that is, the lower you make. If it's 10%, let's say, as a flat tax, and you make $1 million, it's 10%. If you only make 10,000, it's only 10%, right? So it's equivalent. But if you kind of look at this breakdown, it's sort of close to that.
Well, yeah, honestly, it kind of works in the favor of if all the taxes get paid. A huge majority of the taxes get paid, by the people that are making more money, so that the people that aren't making as money don't have to pay as much tax.
Well, we've seen this be a conversation piece throughout this whole election campaign. So I'll leave it with this. It's not so much the taxes we're paying in, it's the inefficiency of what they do with the money. The wastefulness really.
Yeah. Nice, Mark. End this with the open-ended, annoying most statement possible during an election.
But it is the wastefulness that, there's plenty of money coming in. We just don't do a very good, they don't do a very good job of how they use it.
And we keep electing them, so that's our fault.
Very true. Very true. Well, it's not like the options presented to us sometimes are the best options under the sun. So the whole system is interesting, but we won't go any further. We'll let it be. Have yourself a good time, folks. Have yourself a good week. Try to stay safe and sane out there, because I'm sure it's going to be an interesting November for sure. This is our early November podcast. So if you enjoy our conversations, and we certainly hope that you do, and you pick up a useful nugget or two of information, reach out to Charles and Sherry if you need some help with whatever situation might be bugging you financially speaking, because financial choices matter. We've got all the information in the show description details there down below, so just check that out to be able to click and link up with them and get some time onto their calendar. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can catch new episodes on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and we'll see you next time here on Financial Choices Matter.
Ready to learn more? Get a complimentary review of your retirement landscape today. Reach out to Charles and Sherry at Pelleton Capital. Don't wait and let time pass you by. Sit down and build a rock-solid strategy that keeps the focus on you and your family. Visit Pelleton Capital or click the link in the show description. And don't forget to subscribe to Financial Choices Matter on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.
Financial planning and investment advisory services are provided by Pelleton Capital Management Limited, a state-registered investment advisor. Past performance is not indicative of future results. No one should assume the information presented here serves as a receipt of or substitute for personalized individual advice provided by Pelleton Capital Management. For more information, visit www.pelletoncapital.com.